We tried to come up with a pun for the intro of this video, but they all came out a little too dark. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. Over the last couple of years, something very strange has been happening in Lady Bird Lake, a dammed section of the Colorado River in Austin, Texas. What I mean by that is that since July of 2022, at least 11 bodies have been pulled from the water. The rapidly rising body count has inspired rumors of a serial killer dubbed the Rainey Street Ripper due to the fact that many of the deceased had been on or near that street the night they disappeared. Police, on the other hand, are adamant that there is no connection between any of these deaths and that foul play is not suspected in most of these cases. So the question then is, why the persistence of the serial killer rumors? Is this a situation where the police are covering up a serial killer because they are unable to catch him? Or is this just an instance of the internet doing what the internet does and creating some conspiracy theory out of nothing? Part of the reason for the suspicion, beyond the rather startling and above average number of bodies pulled out of the water since 2022, is another spate of deaths that took place between 2008 and 2019. While the body count didn't rise quite as rapidly during the earlier time span, certain details mirror some of the more recent cases closely enough to warrant questions from a nervous public. And speaking of a nervous public, when people get nervous, they sometimes turn to bad habits as a way to cope. And that's what our partner for today's video, Fume, is here to prevent. We've been working with Fume for a while now, and I can honestly say that the main reasons for that are that it is a good, high-quality product and a great concept. The whole idea behind Fume is that breaking a habit is very difficult, so it's going to be more efficient to replace that habit with something good. With Fume, there is no smoke or vapor, it's simply a flavored air device. That means that you just... That's it. And of course, you're not just holding a little piece of wood and metal up to your mouth and inhaling and exhaling. There's a little flavoring stick in this guy, and that flavoring stick uses all natural flavors. And that's part of why I say it's a good, high-quality product. It uses real wood, real metal, and real all-natural fibers for the flavoring sticks. And because there's no material coming out of it, just your breath, you can actually use it anywhere. And if you like a little bit of elegance with your Fume, you can of course get this little handy-dandy magnetic stand and pop this guy right on it. Looks very nice and flashy on your desk. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that you can't be their next one. And for a limited time, you can use our code LORELODGE to get 10% off when you order the Journey Pack, that's this guy and some flavoring packets, today. To get yours, head to tryfume.com, that is tryfum.com, and use code LORELODGE or scan the QR code on your screen to get 10% off your purchase of the Journey Pack today. And with that said, I'm going to take you guys on a journey to Lady Bird Lake. Before we talk about serial killers at all, we need to establish the facts of each case. And with Lady Bird Lake, that is no small task. At least 18 bodies have been pulled from the water since 2008. And even though the post-2022 recoveries are the ones that made Lady Bird Lake a household name, the earlier ones have to be considered as part of the context, and that starts with the recovery of the body of Riyad Hamad. Hamad was a 55-year-old school teacher reported missing by his family on April 14, 2008. 2 days later, on the 16th, he was found in the lake over by the North Shore just east of the I-35 bridge. The police and the medical examiner ruled it as a suicide, but not everybody agreed with that assessment. Hamad was found with duct tape over his eyes and mouth and both his arms and legs bound, leading many to suspect that this was not self-inflicted at all. This was a murder. The next body to be found was that of Nazima Habibul, a 26-year-old preschool teacher at the Primrose School in nearby Lakeview, Texas. In addition to being a teacher, she also was a mother of a 2-year-old daughter and engaged to a man by the name of Marcus Taylor. An in-law of Habibul's told the Austin American-Statesman that she had left for a grocery store around 9:30 p.m. on the 29th of May, 2008. She was reported missing the next morning at 8 a.m. by her family. Her last known location was on the 11,000 block of Robert Wooding Drive in the Chapel Hill neighborhood of Austin. From what I can tell, this seems to have been her home. And she was last seen driving a dark gray 2006 Toyota Corolla headed to a grocery store on Slaughter Lane. A few days later, around 6:35 a.m., two fishermen found her body floating in the water of Lady Bird Lake beneath the I-35 bridge. Reports were unclear as to whether or not her car was ever located. And unfortunately, there's really not much else to be found online about her case. The police said that foul play was not suspected, closed it, and that's it. What I did find interesting was that one article seemed to claim that her body was so badly decomposed, again after just 3 to 5 days, that they could not determine her age or sex. At least not initially. That said, I was unable to corroborate that. It only appeared in an excerpt of one article on a website, and the link to the article itself was dead because it seems to have been archived or deleted entirely. That's an issue I actually very frequently run into when I'm looking at cases in the early 2000s. You get this period of time where news was kind of moving out of print and onto the internet. So sometimes you have stuff that was never put in print and was put on the website, but when the website was redesigned years later, that article just disappeared. It's just gone. And if it's not in the Wayback Machine, it's gone for good. I mean, I'm sure there's some way that somebody a lot more tech savvy than me could bring this stuff back, but I can only do so much. In any case, it could have just been misreported that she was that badly decomposed. If she was that badly decomposed, it's a little odd, but it's also not completely impossible, I guess. It would be pretty odd. Nearly 6 years after the recovery of Habibul's body from the lake, yet another one was found on February 17, 2014, near the streets of Cesar Chavez and Lavaca. The deceased was identified as 20-year-old Eleno Efron Valley, a student at St. Edward's University, who had been reported missing by his family 10 days earlier. The police ruled this death to be a suicide. A few months later, another body was reported by the Congress Avenue Bridge. On Tuesday, July 22, 2014, 84-year-old Ramona Hernandez de Lopez was found deceased by police and EMS. The cause of death was determined to be an accidental drowning. Not long after that, around 2:30 a.m. on October 11, 2014, fishermen discovered the body of 25-year-old Aaron David Rublick in the water near the Holiday Inn and the I-35 bridge. Rublick had been out with friends that night, and he decided to take an Uber back to his home on Rainey Street. However, for some reason, it was not clear whether it was that he routed to this location or that the Uber driver kicked him out or if he requested to get out of the car. But for some reason, Rublick got out of the Uber at the Holiday Inn. Police suggested that he had walked over to the water, fallen in, and they ruled it an accidental drowning with no suspicion of foul play. One thing I will say was a general trend with a lot of these cases is that it was never explained why foul play was ruled out, why it wasn't suspected. They just said, nope, we don't suspect foul play. And you may say, well, if the police don't suspect foul play, they probably have a reason, but I would like to remind everybody that the police did not suspect foul play in the death of Tommy Booth, and we pretty conclusively proved that Tommy Booth was murdered. The police also said that there was no foul play in the death of Todd Geib, despite the fact that, according to their narrative, he was in warm water for 21 days and didn't decompose at all. Of course, these are both smiley face killers cases, and we've been talking about the smiley face killer stuff at length for a while. Some people have even suggested that the Lady Bird Lake situation is related to the smiley face killers hypothesis. That said, I would never make the argument that the smiley face killers idea has been proven or that cases between cities are necessarily connected. We have made the argument that the La Crosse cluster seems to have been a group of connected cases, but I don't think there's enough evidence right now to suggest that this is a nationwide set of connected drownings. But the reason I bring all of that up is that in a lot of the cases we look at where people are deemed to have drowned accidentally, and maybe it's a little suspicious, people aren't sure if there was foul play or not, but the police say there wasn't, a lot of the time the police give out more information. There's a little bit more to go on. In this case, most of these deaths, all the police said was foul play not suspected, and in some of them, the media actually had to go and file Freedom of Information Act style requests to get the names of the deceased. I don't know if this is a difference between Texas law versus the laws in other states we've looked at, or if this is specifically Austin Police Department policy, but a little bit more transparency from the police about why things have been ruled as accidents and why foul play has been ruled out would probably go a long way with establishing public trust. Going back to the cases, however, the summer following the discovery of Rublick, on June 5, 2015, 22-year-old University of North Texas student Julio Santes disappeared after a night of drinking with his friends on Red River Street. Santos was headed for a career in fashion merchandising, having secured an internship with Nordstrom in Seattle. He was last seen waiting in line for a food truck, either on Red River and 6th or Red River and 7th. There's a food truck court at the corner of Red River and 7th, so I'm thinking he was probably there, but a lot of the reporting says Red River and 6th. But in any case, he was last seen somewhere along that block of Red River Street after leaving Barbarella around 2 a.m. Not long after he went missing, Santos's body was unfortunately found in Lady Bird Lake, just south of the Holiday Inn next to the I-35 bridge. Initially, the police did consider this disappearance to be somewhat suspicious, possibly due to Santos's non-traditional appearance. However, when they discovered that there was a lack of suspicious physical trauma to the body, they determined that it was probably an accident and that they did not suspect foul play. Family members, on the other hand, were not so sure, his sister having recently suggested that when Santos disappeared, he was actually on his way to meet somebody. She also suggested that it was possible that these men in general were being lured somewhere by someone, which, to be fair, is what we suggested might have happened in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Santos' sister also noted that there was exactly one thing missing from his body. Everything else was intact. He was only missing his belt. This, in her opinion, could suggest that somebody took it from him. And if you were to see this, where, say, we looked at all of these cases and 5 people were missing their belts and nothing else, that might be something that you consider a signature, but in this case, we don't have that. This is the only one where I was able to confirm a belt was missing. And then there was Julio's toxicology report, which, so far as anyone could tell, did not contain a screening for GHB or Rohypnol. I was only able to find one publicly available autopsy report for any of these cases. It was that of Jason Johns, and it did not appear that they screened for GHB. It was not named, but they did say that they screened for things that aren't named. It's, like I said, it's unclear. We would have to speak to the coroner to actually ask the question. 3 years later, on November 19th, 2018, a Martin Gutierrez went missing after drinking with his friends on Rainey Street. His first stop was Luster Pearl, where he had one drink before he moved on to the Alibi. However, at the Alibi, he was refused service and then left around 1:15 a.m. Bar staff at the Alibi told Papers and the police that Gutierrez had just been acting strangely, but precisely what it was that he was doing was never made clear. The one somewhat odd thing captured on video was that when Martin left the bar, he didn't just walk out, he ran. And according to his brother Mitchell, he didn't just run, he frolicked. And frolicking was apparently very out of the ordinary for this man. Also out of the ordinary for Martin Gutierrez would have been having one drink and then being unservably intoxicated. In any case, he was heading south down Rainey Street and was last captured on camera at the intersection of Rainey and Holly, heading towards I-35 as he was supposedly looking for a ride. Unfortunately, on November 26th, the body of Martin Gutierrez was found in Lady Bird Lake, just behind the Berkshire Riverview apartments on East Riverside Drive. Martin Gutierrez's death was ruled an accidental drowning, but his brother Mitchell has contested that, largely due to the fact that the autopsy lists blunt force trauma to Martin's head. Because bruising requires blood flow, Mitchell suggested that whatever happened to Martin to cause the bruising must have happened while he was alive. Since nobody with Martin that night was able to recall him hurting his head, it seemed that whatever caused the bruising happened between him leaving the bar and him entering the water. To this day, some believe that Martin Gutierrez was drugged, stalked, and then murdered, while others believe that he was lured into some kind of trap. Either way, there's a lot of suspicion that foul play was in fact involved here, and the police have never really explained why they ruled it out. Exactly a year after the disappearance of Martin Gutierrez, 21-year-old Christian Pugh was reported missing on November 19th, 2019, after a night out drinking on Rainey Street with friends, where he was last seen at 1:37 a.m. According to articles from the time, Christian started his night by parking his car in a parking lot along Slaughter Lane. Articles say that he called an Uber to take him to Rainey Street, but then for some reason, he left his phone in his car when he was picked up. His last credit card charge that night was at a bar called Clive, but cameras last saw him dancing at Container Bar across the street at 1:37. His friends were seen on camera waiting for him outside, but ultimately they decided to leave without him. And oddly enough, Christian was never seen leaving the bar, at least not on camera. A search was launched for Christian the next day at around 10:30 p.m. when people became aware that this was definitely out of the ordinary for him. And then 60 hours after he disappeared, Christian Pugh was recovered alive but in very rough shape just south of the Congress Avenue Bridge. He was brought to the ICU at Del Seton Medical Center, where he entered a coma until he was eventually healthy enough for rehabilitation. As for how Christian Pugh sustained his injuries, police suggested that he probably fell off of the bridge due to intoxication. Following Pugh's incident, it appears that things were pretty quiet for a while, and then in 2022, another body was recovered. 59-year-old Ricky Parks was found in the lake near the I-35 bridge on July 14, 2022. The only details that the police gave about Ricky Parks, and that's not exactly a unique name, it's not easy to find any old Ricky Parks in Austin, Texas, but all they told us is that he's 59. They didn't really give reasoning as to why they determined that foul play was not suspected. They just said, foul play not suspected, found a man in the river, that's all. A few months later, 2 more bodies were recovered, the first on December 10th and then another on December 28th. The deceased in this case were Christopher Gutierrez and 56-year-old Kyle Thornton. Again, really no information about these guys was given, aside from they were found in the lake and here are their ages. In fact, in the case of Christopher Gutierrez, I'm pretty sure they didn't even give his age. They just said it was Christopher Gutierrez. We actually, for a little while, thought that this was a mistake and that there was no Christopher Gutierrez, but from what I can tell, they just didn't give any information about the guy. Both of these cases were closed without suspicion of foul play, and nothing else was said on the matter. There was another recovery in December, that of Josue Moreno, but he was shot as he was driving along Riverside Avenue, and his car then went over the guardrail and into a creek. I don't think that qualifies. If any of these cases are connected, his case is not one of them. A couple months later, on February 5th, 2023, Jason John was out with his friends on Rainey Street when he decided to head home around 2 a.m. Cameras show him walking south along Rainey Street for about 10 of the 18 minutes it should have taken him to walk home. John was only reported missing when it was realized that he had not been home to take care of his dog. Police ultimately located John in the lake between Rainey Street and I-35 on February 13th, 2023, working off of a tip that was given to them by a homeless man who claimed he saw John vomiting into the water, then falling in, and that he had tried to assist John, but was unable to. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that John had a blood alcohol content of 0.21, and that the cause of death was an alcohol-related accidental drowning. However, the autopsy also records that there was partially digested food in John's stomach, and there was no reference to any sort of material that would have suggested vomiting. And in addition to that, it's unclear if John was actually tested for GHB or Rohypnol, as neither of them are listed on the report. Less than a month later, the body of 40-year-old Clifton Axtell was found floating in the lake by 1100 Riverside Drive on March 5th, 2023. His cause of death ultimately could not be determined, and nobody had actually seen him go into the water. Axtell had last been seen leaving Stubbs Barbecue on the 25th of February, and it's unclear how long he was in the water. He did have a history of depression, but just 2 days before he was last seen, he had told a doctor that he was not experiencing suicidal ideation. Police have not released a firm cause or manner of death in this case due to a lack of evidence. Within another month, there was another body, this time that of 33-year-old Jonathan Honey, who was in D.C. for a bachelor's party on March 31st, 2023. While he was drinking with friends on Rainey Street that evening, he decided he was going to go look for something to eat at a nearby food truck. The very next day, April 1st, 2023, Honey's body was found in the water just south of Rainey Street and to the west of the I-35 bridge. Police ruled his death to be an accidental drowning, and his tox screen came back clean, though once again, we don't know if they tested for GHB or Rohypnol. 15 days later, on April 15th, the body of Christopher Hayes Clark was pulled from the water just near the 2700 block of Canterbury Street, which itself is just west of the Longhorn Dam. His cause of death was once again ruled an accidental drowning. It's unclear when he went into the water or if he was ever reported missing by his long-term girlfriend. And yet again, the police simply said, no foul play suspected, but didn't explain why. And when you've got this many bodies in this short a period of time, even if you're very confident that they're not connected, it's best to give the public a reason to believe that. And it seems that the Austin police have yet to do so. Each of these cases, for the most part, all we see is foul play not suspected. At a certain point, just telling the public, hey, you have nothing to worry about, is not enough. People need reassurance, and they're not getting it. And that lack of reassurance has fed into these fears that there may be a serial killer operating. And again, we're getting there. We're going through all of this. But my point in saying this is to get it across that people are gonna want answers, not just to be told what to do or how to feel. So far as I can tell, the most recent person to turn up in the lake who has also been identified was a man by the name of Moga Dogale, who was pulled from the water off Lamar Beach Metro Park on June 27th, 2023. Very little was released about the incident, no age, no ethnicity, no, town of residence. All we know is that someone named Moga Dogale was recovered from the water on that date. And the police said that they're not investigating as a homicide. They didn't explain why they're not investigating as a homicide. And again, you can see why there's so much suspicion and so many rumors. People don't have any information, so all they can do is infer. And part of the reason that they're doing so much inferring is because the bodies do keep piling up, and at this point, there's several unidentified ones as well. Along with the people we've mentioned so far, there was also a female found near the First Street Bridge and a black male found near the dam. Foul play was not suspected in either case, and the police maintain that there is no reason to believe that there is a serial killer active in Austin, Texas. But for many people, as I've said, that's simply not enough. Serial killers are very rarely random. Bundy targeted young white women with brown hair, Gacy young white men with medium-length hair, and the Zodiac killer young couples in cars. So we can look at the deceased in Austin to see if any pattern emerges, and in the process of doing so, we can probably rule some people out by demographics alone. If we stick with the identified bodies, then we have about 16 potential victims. Of those 16, 14 are male and 2 are female, 3 are Middle Eastern, 1 is black, 9 are white or Hispanic, and 3 were of uncertain background. And 3 were under 25, 5 were ages 25 to 34, 1 ages 35 to 44, 3 ages 55 to 64, 1 75 to 84, and 3 unclear. While the basic demographic information certainly doesn't tell the whole story, it can tell us that if there is a serial killer, there are certain groups he's probably not targeting. For example, only one potential victim was over the age of 75. That was Ramona Hernandez de Lopez. Because only one victim could be considered elderly, it's unlikely that if there is a serial killer, elderly people are part of his victim profile. If Ramona was targeted by a serial killer, then we would expect to see more old women in the victim profile. Now, while De Lopez was not the only woman, she was of vastly different age and a different race from the other woman. Habibul was just 26 years old and of Middle Eastern origin. Because we only have 2 female victims and they share basically nothing in terms of demographics, then it's very unlikely that if there's a serial killer, women are part of his victim profile. And while we're on the topic of age, it should be said that while Axtell was the only person in his age group, he was young looking enough that he could have passed for being in his mid-30s. For that reason, I'm not going to rule him out based on age alone. Looking at the races of potential victims, it's a lot less skewed than just if we profile by age. That said, whites and Hispanics do make up the majority of potential victims, with up to 4 being potentially black, whereas we know 3 are Middle Eastern. However, with the context we have, it's unlikely that the Middle Eastern group are actually connected to one another. The reason I say that is because we've kind of ruled out women as being part of the victim profile because they make up such a small percentage, and if we look at Hamada, it seems possible he was a political target. He was raided by the FBI not long before he disappeared and eventually turned up in the river, and if we look at the MO here, nobody else was wrapped up in duct tape with their arms and legs bound. Switching gears to look at the black group, I was only able to confirm the race of one of those individuals, and he's 20 years younger than the other 2 that have ages listed. The 4th, Moga Dogale, which I believe could also be an Italian name, oddly enough, his age wasn't even given. Ricky Parks and Kyle Thornton, the other 2 who may have been African American, they were too old. What that means is that within the Middle Eastern group and within the possibly black group, there's really nothing connecting any of the cases. Thornton, Parks, and Hayes Clark were all found in different locations in the lake anyway, and not close together, just completely different parts. And, to be perfectly honest, there's not enough information about any of those 4 cases to come to any further conclusions. Based on what we have, there's nothing to connect them. There may be unrevealed details or undiscovered details that might connect these people, but it would be irresponsible for us to make speculative claims based on that. So if we take black and Middle Eastern people out of the potential victim pool, we're left with the white and Hispanic group, which, depending on who you ask, could theoretically include people of Middle Eastern descent and therefore Jason John. Essentially, if we rule out everybody who disrupts the pattern, we're left with 8 potential victims. All of them are male, all of them are between the ages of 20 and 40, and all are phenotypically generally similar, at least in that they're all relatively light-skinned men. So, with the demography established, we can start looking at other contributing factors, such as location. One thing that comes up pretty frequently with these stories is Rainey Street, where honey, Martin Gutierrez, John, Rublik, and Pugh were all seen the nights they went missing. And while Santos is not known to have been on Rainey Street drinking the night he went missing, he was found in the river just off of Rainey Street. Conversely, while we do know that Pugh was drinking on Rainey Street, he did not show up south of Rainey Street. He turned up close to the Congress Avenue Bridge. As for those who did turn up south of Rainey Street, that was Santos, John, Gutierrez, Rublik, and Honey. So of our remaining 8 potential victims, we can place 6 of them at Rainey Street, with Axtell and Valley being the odd men out. Valley was found by the First Street Bridge, and while tragic, suicide does seem to be the most likely reason for his death. It's believed that he had been off prescribed antidepressant medication, and the bridge near which he was found is the one closest to his home. With Axtell, it's a bit harder to say, but between his age, his lack of proximity to the other potential victims, and his known mental health situation, I'm unwilling to connect him to the others. So as we narrow down the potential victim pool, they do start to seem more and more like they could be connected to one another. Still, even within this victim group, there are some things that need to be addressed. For example, Pugh was found nearly a mile upriver from the others, and in far more serious physical condition, and Santos was far more androgynous than the rest of the victims. What I mean by that is that while Santos is within the age range and the correct sex, if you look at the individual and you go beyond those basic details, Santos liked to wear his hair long, he sometimes wore more feminine-styled clothing, he wore more feminine-styled jewelry, whereas the other members of this group, they are more traditionally masculine. So what I mean to say is that while I wouldn't necessarily rule out foul play in the case of Julio Santos, I wouldn't necessarily want to connect him to the others. And aside from the discrepancies in appearance between Santos versus the rest of them, there's also the fact that Santos wasn't actually drinking on Rainey Street that night. He was on Red River Street. As for Pugh, the immediate difference is that he was found near the Congress Avenue Bridge, whereas the rest of them were found down near Rainey Street and I-35. That said, while Rainey Street certainly does seem like it could be some kind of dump site, it would be very possible that somebody could be throwing the bodies off of the Congress Avenue Bridge and they just floated their way down to Rainey Street. However, that does still leave the issue of Pugh's extensive injuries, and then there's also the fact that a homeless man claims to have seen Jason John vomiting into the water before falling in. I will say I'm a little perplexed by the Jason John story due to the autopsy, because the autopsy does not suggest this man vomited right before he died, whereas the homeless guy said that he saw Jason John vomiting right before he fell into the water. It's of course possible that the homeless man very much did see Jason John throw up, then fall into the water, and that I just misunderstood the autopsy report. It's also possible that somebody could have paid the homeless guy to lie. While I'm by no means going to sit here and try to tell you that all homeless people are criminals, because that's just not the truth, when you think about the situation that a lot of homeless people are in and how desperate many of them are, you could see how somebody might be willing to look the other way in exchange for some cash. With no further information to go on, it's really hard to say what this situation is, and due to that level of uncertainty, I think it's best if we don't try to connect John to the rest of them. When it comes to the case of Christian Pugh, I think it can be explained, but it definitely gets pretty conspiratorial. It's a lot more complicated of an explanation than, they're just being dumped into the river on Rainey Street. And it should also be noted that at this point, we're down to 4 potential victims. The question, of course, being, is there anything further that connects these men to one another? And there actually kind of is. You see, the night they went missing, Pugh needed a ride back to his car, Honey was a tourist, Gutierrez was looking for a ride, and Rublik had just been dropped off by an Uber. Now, according to the Heart Starts Pounding podcast, who seem to have drawn on a Honeydew with Y'all podcast interview with Pugh himself, Christian said that he remembers arriving at a pregame for a friend's birthday outing and nothing after that. As for why his friends left him behind at Container Bar, nobody is really sure. It could be that they were just annoyed that he wasn't coming out. It could also be that he had met a girl and they decided to let things go their way that they were going to go. There is one definite discrepancy between Christian's account and the Contemporary News Report. The Contemporary News Report said that he left his phone in his own car, whereas his version of events involves him leaving his phone in an Uber. Either way, he would have needed to ask somebody for a ride, or he would have needed to ask somebody if he could use their phone to call an Uber. As a result, he could have been abducted by somebody posing as an Uber driver, brought to the bridge, and then thrown off of it. If he had landed too close to the shore, he could have then sustained the fall-like injuries with which he was found. Essentially, if somebody were to impersonate an Uber driver, he would be able to rather easily abduct unwitting men, drive them somewhere, and then, given that they were already intoxicated, just yeet them over a bridge. So theoretically, this is one way that a serial killer could be responsible for all 4 of these deaths. If we exclude Pugh, however, we're left with 3 men who all disappeared somewhere between Rainey Street and the Holiday Inn, and were found in the water right there. These men are 25-year-old Aaron David Rublick, 25-year-old Martin Gutierrez, and 33-year-old Jonathan Honey. Of everyone, those 3 seem to be the most likely to be connected to one another, so if there is a serial killer, it seems most likely to me that those are his only 3 victims. But it needs to be considered that that's just 3 out of the 18 that we've started with. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm not sold on the idea of a serial killer here. These were all men who were in their physical prime. They were between the ages of 25 and 33. Even drunk, they would have put up a fight. There aren't a ton of physical details out there about these guys, but we do have pictures of, at the very least, Martin Gutierrez and Jonathan Honey, and they're not small dudes. They're not built, but they're average sized. You're not going to be able to just kind of manhandle them easily. And the reason I point that out, that they probably would have put up a fight, is not to say that it's impossible someone could have overpowered them, but that you would expect there to be more defensive injuries on each of these men. But only Martin Gutierrez has any sort of bruising listed. Now, it could be that there are things in the autopsies of Rublick and Honey that suggest there was a fight of some kind, but if those details exist, they're not public. As for the injuries sustained by Gutierrez, it wasn't a ton. There was blunt force trauma to the head and bruising to the back of the head. If this man was drowned manually, then someone must have incapacitated him to some extent before drowning him. Otherwise, there would be much more extensive bruising. So when we consider all of the evidence that we have here, at least what is publicly available, what has been released about each of these disappearances and deaths, it's my opinion that there is not a strong enough body of evidence to suggest a serial killer is active in Austin, Texas. On the other hand, this is definitely an unusual number of bodies for Austin. I went back and I looked, tried to find newspaper articles and news website articles reading things along the lines of body pulled from Lady Bird Lake. And, every once in a while you see somebody was pulled from the lake. Sometimes they're pulled from the lake alive. You don't see spates of a dozen bodies in 2 years. If I were a resident of Austin, even if I didn't believe there to be a serial killer, I would certainly still have questions about why so many people are turning up in the lake. Because statistically, it does seem like some sort of body dumping spike is going on right now. But the police keep saying, no signs of foul play, no evidence of foul play, no suspicion of foul play. Problem I have with that is, hey, they might be completely right, but they've given nobody the information necessary to agree with them. Not every police department is as incompetent as the Ridley Township Police, or the Michigan State Police, or the entirety of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But when I look at this, I'm not sure if I'm seeing incompetence or opacity. I don't know if this is that the government doesn't want to reveal what they know, or that they just don't realize how bad a job they're doing at PR. I mean, think about it with using your local town. Say that you have a pond nearby, right? And one year, bodies just start to turn up in the pond every 3 months. And the police don't say, hey, the cause of death was this, and it's proven because of this, this, and this. They just tell you, oh, there's nothing to worry about. No suspicions, nothing to worry about. How many bodies do you think it takes before you start asking questions? I can tell you from personal experience, we actually did have a body turn up in the Schuylkill River not that long ago. I think it was a couple years back now. This is right outside of where I live. I was familiar with the man they found because of what I knew about him. I was not surprised that it was not foul play, or at least that they did not suspect foul play. But if another person turned up 3 months later, I might start to think, hey, that's a little weird. If I were to get 3 people in a year when usually we have none, I would definitely be hounding the local police department for questions. And if my local police department dug in their heels and kept saying there's no suspicion of foul play, and I asked why, and then another body turned up and they just said the same thing and wouldn't tell me why, I would actually get angry and I would start to believe they were hiding something. To give the most charitable interpretation of what the Austin police seem to be doing right now, it's basically them saying, well, we know that foul play was not involved, but there's some privacy issues. The families might not be okay with us releasing certain information. It's probably in the best interest of those directly involved. We don't give too many details. But in doing so, they're kind of convincing people that there's something being hidden. It could be that there's an extremely reasonable explanation for every single one of these people's deaths. It could be that somebody was on drugs. It could be that somebody had been expressing suicidal ideation and that their families just said, hey, we want to keep this close to the vest. It's better for us if this is private. Well, that's totally understandable, but maybe the police should come out and say, while we won't give out any specific identifying details, 3 of these cases were ruled out because we confirmed beyond a reasonable doubt that this was a suicide. If they were to say, this guy was found with a blood alcohol content of 0.45 and near a bridge with no guardrails, okay, I'm gonna accept that was probably an accident. But when all you will say is no suspicion of foul play, and you have over a dozen bodies, people are gonna have questions, and all you do by refusing to give them more information is breed more and more conspiracy theories. I'm not saying that balancing the private wishes of a deceased person's family with the public interest in having the information necessary to understand current events is an easy task. I'm obviously not saying that's a simple thing. But at a certain point, you definitely need more than just remain calm, everyone. But hey, that's why we're here. We may not get everything right every single time, and there may be things that we missed even in this video. But the good thing is, you can always leave a comment telling us what we missed. And in future videos, when we address things again, sometimes just stuff comes up in context, because often, we'll be talking about one random thing and it's like, oh yeah, and this guy who disappeared in this instance, cities away, had a similar set of events. Whenever that happens, if you give us a comment where you're like, hey, you forgot about John Smith, then I'll go and I'll look into John Smith and be like, oh, okay, I forgot about John Smith. And next time we talk about something that relates to this, I'll say, by the way, we found out after doing the first video that John Smith disappeared under mysterious circumstances and seems to have been connected to this. So please engage, leave comments, tell us what you think, tell us if there's things you think we could be doing better, if I pronounced something wrong, anything of the sort. We are all ears. Please help us out. And if you want to support what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, you can subscribe to us here on YouTube or on Patreon for just $1 a month. That gets you access to exclusive content. Oh God, we have to shoot a drunk folklore this week. I'm not excited for that. Isn't this the last Saturday of the month?
No. Remember we said we were going to do it next Saturday?
Okay.
Because you have the party.
Right. And yeah. It would not be good for me to do that before the party. I thought we said we were going to do it before the party.
Oh, we could, because Kat's parents are coming in next weekend, so...
All right, well, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. Are you just going to leave all this in?
I wasn't planning on it, but I can.
Might as well. All right, well, anyway, so yeah, we're not sure when Drunk Folklore is coming. It's either this weekend or next weekend. If you're watching this video 4 months from now, it doesn't matter. Anyway, you can subscribe to us on either of those services to support us directly. You can also purchase our coffee from Tableau Roasting Company. I designed it myself. It is not just coffee off a store shelf. I had thoughts on the flavor profile. I also had thoughts on the victim profile, but those are different things. We're also in the final steps of getting our merch with Bunker branding approved and ready for launch. We will have an announcement about that coming very soon. Other announcements coming very soon. We are launching multiple new channels. One is going to be with our friend Celso, who's going to be doing mixology and service industry content. Another with our buddy Luke, who's going to be doing all sorts of music industry stuff, interviewing people. And then our last one is going to be Jody, who is going to be doing mental health and, strength through adversity, small business ownership, sort of content about, fighting through it and making something of your life no matter what's thrown at you. We will have announcements about all 3 of those channels coming up here. You can also catch our live show, The Lore Lads, which is every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, unless we say it isn't, but it's usually that time. We also put that up on Spotify and Apple and every other podcast platform you can get to, so you can catch it there as well. We also have several other channels already. Those are The Weird Bible, The History Hut, The Lore Lounge, and my personal channel, Aiden Mattis. Aiden Mattis is the one that has the most content on it currently, but The Weird Bible also should be getting something every month. We just shot another one very recently. And when it comes to updates for this channel and what we're up to, what's going on, new stuff, all that, the best place to go is our Discord. That is bit.ly/jointhelodge. Last but not least, I want to thank Fume for sponsoring this video. We've been working with them for a while, and we genuinely do like them. With all that said, my name is Aiden Mattis, and thank you for stopping by the Lore Lodge.